Hello there. Welcome to Planet America's Fireside Chat. I'm John Barron.
And I'm Chaz Licciardello.
Nice cap, by the way.
Thank you.
I'm getting strong sort of Beaver Cleaver vibes off that right now.
Although my clothes are a bit confused.
Yeah, that's balance. That's ABC balance. It's good to see. We are going to have a very chatty final Fireside Chat for this year. 3 great guests for you. We'll be looking back on an extraordinary election year with former Democratic Senator Heidi Heitkamp, and also look ahead to Trump's second term with former Republican Governor of Virginia, Jim Gilmore.
And we're also going to be looking at growing concerns about the negative side effects of fluoride in America's drinking water. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. wants to get rid of it. Could he actually be right on this one?
So here we are, Chaz, 3 and a bit weeks after the election. The dust is settling. The recriminations on the Democratic side, not so much beginning as, I guess, a little bit of soul searching going on for the first time this week. We had some former key staff members of the Harris campaign, Stephanie Cutter, Jen O'Malley-Dillon, David Plouffe, speaking to the guys from Pod Save America, their first public utterances since the election. And we started to get a picture as to, well, what do they really think? Did they think they have a chance? Because remember, Kamala Harris was out there saying, and we will win. When we fight, we win. Turns out they had a lot of internal data going, no, we're going to lose. Actually, we're not going to win. Yeah. Plouffe revealed that even when there was polling in late September, early October that had Harris getting to 3-4 points in front in the battleground states, particularly in the Rust Belt, all of their internal polling was saying they were still behind. Yes, it was competitive. Yes, they were gaining ground on a number of key measures, but they were never quite getting there. So they were optimistic, but they were never particularly confident. Now we know that. Does it make sense in retrospect?
Look, to be fair to them, they were at least very upfront during the election. Like, there was never a time when they were going, oh, we're streaking ahead. It was always, when they did seem to be 3 or 4 points ahead, they were saying, that's not what we're seeing, but it's going to be very close. We predict it's going to be very close.
Maintain we are the underdogs. That was certainly something Harris said.
So they were being honest in that regard. Because some people are saying, oh, yeah, now you say this, you just took $1 billion off your small donors. Don't you feel a bit guilty about that? But to be honest, I think they were actually pretty straightforward during the election. Is it a surprise? Not really to me. I mean, I think the whole time we were talking about how the Democrats weren't as far ahead as they might seem. Right. And that this was Trump's election to lose. I think that was the conventional wisdom amongst the election sort of nerds. So I think that this is not a surprise.
Yeah, and when you kind of do look back, and I think it happens with us as well when we're analysing things as they go, you remember the times you got it right. The number of times we talked about the very real possibility that Harris was going to do better than Joe Biden was going everywhere, in each of the 7 battlegrounds, but not quite enough, that she could still lose it in a sweep, and that's exactly what happened. Yeah. I'm sure we said the exact opposite on a different day, but there were days when we got it exactly right.
There were definitely days
and
when we got it right.
It seems to me as well that the Harris staffers, they're certainly cutting her a lot of slack as a candidate. They're full of praise for her, what she achieved in a 107-day campaign.
And cutting themselves slack, John.
Exactly. Because, and they're not saying we got this wrong. We knew what this election was about. We knew the headwinds against us with the state of inflation in the economy, Trump's appeal, and so on. They knew their areas of weakness, particularly younger white men and younger brown men. They made gains in those areas. They spent the money on trying to, but basically they're saying, we didn't do anything wrong. We just didn't have time to do enough of those other things right. We knew what we had to do, and we kind of got closer than we were, but not close enough. As if there was another 107 days, if it had been a 18-month campaign rather than a 3-and-a-bit-month campaign, they could have won. Yeah,
look, I mean, I continue to think that some of their strategies were not what I would have done. Like, I've been very consistent on that. I always thought the batten down small target strategy was a mistake, which is what she employed. But having said that, I do think that the strategy they tried to execute, they executed pretty well. Yeah. Like, yes, Kamala Harris had some bad interviews, but their strategy was to minimise interviews.
Well, their argument is, in fact, we tried to maximise interviews in the places that were going to reach the people that we needed to get to. So it wasn't about doing more network TV or cable interviews. apparently, they were all for doing a Joe Rogan interview, for example, but couldn't make it work in terms of the schedule. It was either go to Pennsylvania or go to Texas for one interview with Joe Rogan. Maybe they should have done that after all. Maybe it was going to make no difference.
It wouldn't have made a difference.
Interestingly, Kamala Harris herself reappeared in public, well, sort of, at least in an online video this week. And look, she ran a gauntlet in those 107 days, maintained incredible energy and enthusiasm. Kind of looks like it's all caught up with her now, though.
I just have to remind you, don't you ever let anybody take your power from you. You have the same power that you did before November 5th. And you have the same purpose that you did. And you have the same ability to engage and inspire. So don't ever let anybody or any circumstance take your power from you.
Look, a lot of people have been unfair, I think, on her with that clip. Like a lot of people have said...
It's genuine, it's sincere.
It is.
Heartfelt.
It is. Well, a lot of people have said she's drunk.
Yeah.
And
you can imagine it. I mean, can't imagine, really, you don't think she is, but you're going to go, yeah, she does seem a couple in.
Yeah, look, she seems exhausted.
Yeah.
But I think that is fair enough. I think people having a go at her for being exhausted after a campaign, they don't know what it's like. They don't know what they're talking about. Now, I've never run for president, but for those who know my lifestyle, I live like I'm running for president.
Right,
so
yeah.
I don't get much sleep, right?
Yeah.
And I know that...
Including the fast food.
Yeah, as well. I know after a 6-month run, I'm done.
Yeah.
Like, not for 3 weeks, for 2 months.
Yeah.
Like, you become depressed. You become exhausted for weeks and weeks and weeks. You just can't drag yourself out of bed. If you feel like you've got chronic fatigue, it's hard.
Yeah.
And she probably is exhausted.
Absolutely.
She's probably completely done. And I don't think people should have a go at her because of that. Yeah. I think that she's a human being and people should cut some slack. And it's easy for people on Twitter to have a go. You guys haven't done anything. You really haven't. So don't be having a go at people who've done something.
Yeah.
And maybe they failed, but at least they had a go.
Yeah.
And now they're paying the price for it.
And she was 250,000 votes in 3 states away from being elected president of the United States.
Yeah.
So she didn't miss by much, that's for sure. Our first guest this week is one of our very favourites, Heidi Heitkamp, former Democratic Senator from the state of North Dakota. She served in the Senate during the Obama and Trump presidencies. These days, she's Director of the Institute of Politics at the University of Chicago, Illinois. Heidi Heitkamp, happy Thanksgiving and a warm welcome back to Planet America's Fireside Chat.
Well, thank you so much. There's nobody I'd rather spend the day before Thanksgiving than with my Australian friends.
I'm wondering, Heidi, how would you characterise the mood among your fellow Democrats this week? 3 and a bit weeks after the election, there seems to be a view among some that perhaps this was an inevitable outcome. It was always going to be an uphill battle. But do you think there were perhaps a few sliding door moments in retrospect over the last year or two, perhaps where things could have been different and Trump could have been stopped?
You know, I think for people like me who have been in this business for a long time, you look at the right track, wrong track numbers that we came into, you look at consumer confidence, you look at economic numbers, and it was pretty foolish to think that there wouldn't be a change in administration. Quite honestly, I think people thought that Donald Trump would be so abhorrent that people would never vote for him. So if we had a chance as Democrats to win, that chance would be amplified because of Donald Trump being the opposition. I think that a lot of people, against what was common sense, built their hopes up, and I think those hopes were dashed. And now I think people are exhausted in the Democratic Party. But I also think there's a big discussion right now about whether Kamala went too far to the middle, whether she was too moderate. And then for a lot of the moderates, their argument would be that they went too far left. And so there's a lot of soul searching going on in the Democratic Party. And I think that's a good thing. You know, I said it's good that the result was so definitive, because that means the Democratic Party is going to have to really examine whether they believe that they need to make some changes in how they message and how they govern.
And do you have a view about what went wrong?
Oh, yeah.
Well, don't be shy. What is it?
My view is that there was way too much attention to the cultural left and not enough attention to the bread and butter issues. You know, I have a friend, Barbara Mikulski, former senator from Maryland, and she used to say something that was just so smart. She would say, "Yeah, the Democrats need to understand the macroeconomic issues, but they win when we focus on the macaroni and cheese issues. You know, our box of macaroni and cheese, and when that box goes up, when it's unattainable or that's all people can afford, that tells you that you're losing the middle of the country. You're losing working class people." And the Democratic Party prides itself in doing, really looking at governance through the lens of helping people who are in the working class. And the working class pretty much said, "We don't like your brand of politics." And that requires a reset, I think.
So clearly, Joe Biden's presidency is about to draw to an end, less than a couple of months left in his administration. How do you think Joe Biden's tenure will be remembered, Heidi? And to what extent does the re-election of Donald Trump change or even tarnish his legacy?
I think the book will be written. A lot of people think that his presidency was transformative. Um, but a lot of what he did wasn't permanent. So we'll see what happens with his climate agenda, which is really wrapped around the Inflation Reduction Act, which is subject to repeal at any given point in time. The Democrats did it in reconciliation, which means the Republicans can undo it in reconciliation. And for those of your viewers who understand, that's a bypass around the filibuster, which means you could do it with simple majority vote in the Senate. And so I'm waiting to kind of see. I think a lot of people would say his biggest accomplishment was what he did with the economy coming out of COVID and growing the economy. Unfortunately, a lot of those numbers and a lot of that activity really was related to, unemployment, things that didn't hit the pocketbook. And he was somebody who I think reestablished America's reputation internationally. And so if I were going to write the book right now on Joe Biden, I would talk about kind of him leveraging his relationships across the globe to assist Ukraine in particular, but also kind of reestablishing the dominance of liberal democracy and the transatlantic relationship. But those things again are going to be subject to challenge in this new administration.
And Heidi, what role do you see for the congressional Democrats in this first 2 years of the second Trump administration? Do you think that Democrats should take each decision on its merits, or do you think they should take the Mitch McConnell route and not lift a finger to help?
I think that they should. I never believed in what Mitch did. I think that they should, when they agree, work in a bipartisan way, and when they disagree, to do it very strategically and offer alternatives to ideas that they don't like. I will say this. I don't anticipate that Donald Trump will be going to Congress to ask for a lot of help. I think what Donald Trump intends to do is basically go back to what we used to call the imperial presidency and basically run the entire country from the White House and only go to Congress when he absolutely has to. And that would be budgets and taxes. Our 17 tax law change, a lot of that is triggering off this year after the 2025 tax year. So he's going to have to pass a tax package. I think he's going to, again, drive up debt and deficit. I don't think that's a priority for the president. But I think the president intends to completely bypass the Congress. You saw that in his desire to have recessed appointments and not even get confirmation for his cabinet and his team.
And Heidi, I know you've known Joe Biden a long time. You consider him a personal friend. Knowing him as you do you think he might now break his promise not to issue a presidential pardon for the convictions against his son Hunter in the firearms case and the tax avoidance case as well? And indeed, could he go one step further as a payoff or an olive branch, also issue a pardon to President-elect Trump? Is either outcome likely?
I don't think he'll pardon President Trump. I think President Trump basically secured a legal safe hold when he won the presidency. So I don't anticipate that he's going to pardon President Trump. What he may do is try and look at those organizations that the president has targeted right now, the president-elect Trump has targeted for prosecution. There was a reason why he picked Matt Gaetz for Attorney General. In his previous administration, he had two attorney generals, Bill Barr and Jeff Sessions. He asked them to do things they wouldn't do. So he's looking for someone who will say, yes, sir. And so I think a lot of that will come back to retaliation against groups that he may not agree with. People like Jack Smith, who was the special counsel on both the confidential documents case and on the January 6th case, Liz Cheney. So I think he should look at whether he could preemptively pardon people that Trump intends to retaliate against. I think it would be really a blemish on Joe Biden's legacy if he pardoned his son. He's got the power to do it. I just think he would be remembered for that as opposed to being remembered for building a coalition to help our friends in Ukraine.
Well, Heidi Heitkamp, thank you for being with us on the Fireside Chat, and happy Thanksgiving once again.
You bet. Take care, you guys.
So this week, the Trump transition process continued after a flurry of announcements before last weekend. Publicly, a lot quieter this week, being Thanksgiving week in the United States, of course, but big question marks still around some of those appointments, Pete Hegseth and others. And then there was this announcement midweek, Trump saying he's going to impose a 25% tariff on Canada and Mexico unless they stop illegal immigrants crossing the border. The next day, after the Mexican president, Claudia Sheinbaum, had said, well, if you put tariffs on us, I'll put tariffs on you. So I was like, oh, trade war time. And then within about 12 hours came the announcement from Trump saying, oh, Mexico's vowed to stop the caravans coming to the United States. We've won. We've won already. Didn't even have to impose a tariff.
If he wants to declare victory, that's fine. Just don't do the tariff. I mean, the truth is that Mexico reduced migration on the border a year ago.
Yeah.
Like the numbers have been really quite low for the last, 6 months.
There haven't been any caravans as such.
No.
They've all been stopped somewhere in Mexico before they got to the border.
The numbers the last 6 months have been lower than they were when Trump finished. They've been low. But I mean, it hasn't got much publicity.
Sure.
But they've been low, and it's because of Mexico. It's because of what Mexico have been doing. So they've done their bit. They can't do more. So if Trump just wants a little PR victory, then fine. But what I actually think is going on is I don't think this is the end of it. I think there's going to be a round 2 of this. I think what he wants is for Mexico to allow remain in Mexico to come back. That was the scheme that Trump used to have, where Mexico would basically keep people on the border until their court date comes up, which might be 6 months away, might be a year away. To be honest, I never had a problem with remaining in Mexico if it was run properly. But the problem was it wasn't run properly. When Trump ran it, they just kept them there forever. They never had a court date. It was false hope.
Yeah.
And now if they run it properly, that's fine. But the fact is Mexico just got sick of that, and they said no more remain in Mexico. Yeah. So Trump is now trying, I think, pressure them to bring that back.
Well, the reality, of course, is going to be that if Trump is going to successfully deport or pressure to self-deport 11 to 13 million undocumented workers, and the estimates suggest that maybe a third of them are Mexican nationals, the caravans are going to be going the other way pretty quickly. That's going to be interesting to see. And of course, when something works for Trump, like anyone, I guess, we all, if it works, we'll do it again. Yeah. Trump got his way with this tariff threat. He'll keep threatening this to get what he wants. And if it's border security now, but it's going to be about, well, General Motors, move your manufacturing back to Michigan. Otherwise, we'll put 25% tariffs on every car that's got a component from Mexico. He'll keep trying it.
Just to be clear, he didn't get his way.
Yeah, well.
He pretended he got his way.
Yeah.
like there has been no changes at all.
An invented problem.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just going to say one thing. You mentioned the Mexico and Canada tariffs. You did mention the threat for Chinese tariffs as well. If he does eventually put some of these tariffs on, which he may or may not. By the way, the Mexican Canadian tariffs completely violate his own trade agreement.
Sure.
But let's leave that aside. If he does, he really wants to watch out about having Mexican tariffs at the same time as Chinese tariffs, because where businesses go when they can't trade with China is to Mexico. And you can get away with having Chinese tariffs or Mexican tariffs because they complement each other. If you have both at the same time, I'll tell you what you get. You get inflation. You get big time inflation because there's no replacement for those products if you're going China and Mexico. So as you said, right now it's probably just all PR and bluff. But if it gets to something real at some point in time, he will pay dearly if he institutes tariffs on Mexico and China at the same time.
Question then is, does Trump care? Because this is the end of his political life.
Yeah.
He may just want to make some big structural changes in America, and he doesn't care if inflation goes up to 10% for a couple of years because, well, as Elon Musk has said, there's going to be some pain. There's going to be pain if we're going to get rid of a third of the federal government. There's going to be pain if we're going to reorder the economy. Our next guest, though, is the former Republican governor of Virginia, Jim Gilmore. He's a two-time presidential candidate himself, and he served in the first Trump administration as ambassador to the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Governor, welcome to the Fireside Chat and happy Thanksgiving to you.
Thank you very much. Glad to be back.
So, Governor, as we draw to a close in 2024, what are your reflections on this year? Obviously, politically culminating in the re-election of former President Donald Trump. How do you think this will all go down in history?
Well, recognize that I'm a conservative Republican, and I was supporting President-elect Trump for re-election. So just with that background in mind, I think it'll be a very significant election in American history, and I'll tell you why. There has been somewhat, I think, of a leftward drift in the United States for quite a long time. And so finally beginning particularly with President Obama and then later with President Biden, there's a left-wing type of agenda. And I think that once it began to get into identity politics, gender and race as being touchstones, and other issues like that, particularly the inflation was particularly consequential. Great, giant spending at the beginning of the Biden administration made inflation inevitable. I think there's frustration about the border. And what I think you saw in this election was a pivotal moment. I think that the American people decided that it was time for a change. Actually, I wrote an op-ed to that effect right before the election, that I thought that the mood of the people was for change. Well, one reason why I was reinforced with that was because Vice President Harris spent quite a bit of time in her numerous efforts to get a message. She said that she was the candidate of change. Let's turn the page, she kept saying. Well, the American people didn't buy that. She was not the agent of change. She was the agent of the continuation of the leftward drift. It was President Trump who was the agent of change, and it was very clear. The American people knew him. He'd already been president, and they were prepared to vote for change without regard to anything else. And so I think that's what we're going to see. I think there'll be less emphasis now on climate as a major expenditure. I think that we're maybe in for some foreign policy differences and changes. And I believe that they're going to do what they can do to control inflation. So I think it's a watershed election. Let's see what happens over the next 4 years.
So, Governor, were you then of the opinion that America simply voted against the Biden administration's shortcomings? Or were they also voting for an element of Trumpism? And if so, which element were they voting for?
Well, there was a reciprocal in this election. I've explained that I think pretty clearly people understood what Biden and Harris were really all about, and they were prepared to change away from her and him. And by the way, what's mysterious about this, the Democrats understood it completely, which is why they deposed Biden in the first place and put in Harris. But also, I think that President Trump's personality is clear. I think President Trump's message was clear. I think he told people exactly what he intended to do. And there was a direct choice in American politics this year, and the people of the United States chose.
And can I ask, what do you expect to be the implications of the re-election of President Trump on the war in Ukraine? And do you share the concerns of some that he might be inclined to give away too much to Russia in the search for a peace agreement?
To begin with, your listeners should know, and I will tell them now, that I have been a person that is in support of the Ukrainian war. I believe that you cannot allow Vladimir Putin to change all the rules of international relations and conquer by force another separate independent country. So I just don't think that can be permitted. But I'm not the president, and I didn't get elected to be president. So the President Trump has stated that he's going to settle this very quickly. I don't think that President Putin is amenable to settling the matter quickly. I believe his terms are going to be very tough. And so the direct answer to your question is we don't know how this particular hand of cards is going to play out. We're going to have to wait and see, frankly, the way that President Trump handles it. But I think that if President Putin is unreasonable, and I think he is because he's already sacrificed 700,000 of his own people through killed and wounded. So he is unreasonable. If he's completely unreasonable with President Trump, my hope would be that President Trump will react negatively to that and support Ukraine. But I want to emphasize to your viewers, I don't know. We don't know what the result is going to be when this all gets going. This very day, General Keith Kellogg was named to be a special representative on the Ukraine matter. Now, I know him quite well. I've known him quite a long time. And let's wait and see what the result is going to be. But I personally would not be in favor of Ukraine surrendering territory. But my final word on this is it's up to Ukraine, isn't it? They're the ones whose nation has been invaded. They're the ones who have been the victims of these war crimes and atrocities. They're the ones that are having to recruit their soldiers to go onto the front line against superior Russian numbers. So at the end of the day, the Ukrainians have to make this decision in their own best interest.
Now, Governor, there's been a narrative recently that the world is on fire. Are you concerned about America's ability to deal with all of these conflicts and potentially another one over Taiwan or maybe even Iran?
Well, I was in Taipei several months ago, listening and watching and speaking at a major conference there, keynoting a major conference there. I have been in the Baltic states. I have visited Ukraine itself, but not since 21. But I think I have a good feel for European politics because by virtue of being United States ambassador to the OSCE in Vienna, Austria. First of all, I believe that the world is in conflict. And I believe that many confrontations are coming. It looks like that there's been a step forward in the Middle East with an Israeli-Hezbollah agreement for a ceasefire. We have not seen yet what the result is going to be in Europe. We don't know, but I consider it a pivotal conflict, frankly, because I think it threatens not just Eastern Europe, but all of Europe. And I believe that Europe is an existential matter for the United States of America. I observe that the Chinese, for all of their saber rattling, has not taken any type of irrevocable step. I believe, in my own opinion, is that the Chinese are smarter than the Russians. And I believe they're going to be a lot more cautious, and they're particularly tied up with a lot of economic issues with the West that I think are very productive. I don't know why China has chosen to be so belligerent. They should not be. Now, the final word, I guess I would say, is that I think the United States, as the largest economy, largest military, largest everything really in the Western world, will provide leadership. But I do not personally believe that we have to do that alone. I believe our allies are essential, and I believe that our European allies are essential. I believe that our allies in the Pacific are of vital importance, and that is especially Australia, but also Japan and the Philippines. So there is a very large construct of countries that I believe believe in the international order and freedom and independence. And I hope and believe the United States will continue to exercise that leadership.
And Governor, as a lifelong conservative, how do you feel about President Trump signalling a very aggressive use of trade tariffs against allies as well as adversary nations? Could we be about to see a major trade war erupt?
Well, look, I think this is a good moment for me to remind your viewers that I do not speak for President Trump, and I do not speak for the Trump administration. These are my views based upon my experience and what I believe to be the case because I have been a lifelong Republican and I was a supporter and am a supporter of President Trump. But I don't speak for him in this regard. With respect to trade, look, I think what's really going on here is that there is a feeling that the United States and its allies were very forthcoming for a long time, both with Russia and with China, in a sense that China, particularly right now, decided for whatever reason that they wanted to be the dominant force in the Pacific, and that they would use all the elements of hybrid warfare to get there. And that particularly meant economics. So if China is operating aggressively with their economic policy and really bleeding out, if you will, America and its allies, that has to change. Tariffs may be an instrument. I hope that they will be carefully considered as we go forward. But I believe that once again, the emphasis there is fairness to the American taxpayer that this president wants to be very considerate of.
Now, Governor, President Trump does like to mix things up a bit. He has, for instance, appointed a pro-union Labor secretary. I don't know what's going on with RFK and his entire health setup. It's decidedly unorthodox. Does it bother you when Trump deviates from traditional conservatism, or do you see that as an important ability to reach out to other constituencies?
Well, it is an effort to reach out to other constituencies. When I ran for governor, I did that. And it may have appeared unorthodox, but I never deviated from my conservative principles. We don't know yet how this administration is going to play out. I think I want to repeat for the second time that I think the American people voted for a change, and President Trump was the nominee of change. So that's what happened there. But I think that he's perfectly capable of reaching across party lines. But I think he's a decisive person who intends to create a decisive administration and a decisive program. But once again, he's not even inaugurated yet. So let's see what happens. I certainly would be prepared to offer any advice that I can if I'm asked.
Governor Jim Gilmore, thank you for having a fireside chat with us, and happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks for letting me talk to my friends in Australia.
There is no doubt that former presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has some very unscientific and even dangerous ideas about health. He has raised doubts about whether a whole range of vaccines are safe and effective. He has repeated claims made in a fraudulent and since retracted study which once linked vaccines to autism. That was false. He's questioned whether HIV even causes AIDS. He's promoted a vast array of quack cures and conspiracy theories, and yet, as the saying goes, even a stopped clock is right twice a day. And it seems that Robert Kennedy's concerns about the impact of fluoride on developing brains is based very firmly in emerging scientific opinion. Study after study in the last decade have found that prenatal exposure to fluoride through the mother consuming fluoridated water and other products containing fluoride, like toothpaste, is associated with delays in brain development and lower IQ and impaired social, emotional and behavioural functioning. Now, Kennedy wants to remove fluoride from all of America's public drinking water. It's been there since the mid-1940s. And the fluoridation of American water, just like Australia, it's been hailed by public health advocates. The Centers for Disease Control say it was one of the 10 greatest public health achievements of the 20th century. It reduced tooth decay in children and adults alike. And a lot of dentists, of course, are vehemently opposed to any change in that. They disagree with Kennedy. One has described his claims as, quote, madness, and another telling CBS that solid data going back years shows that fluoride is both safe and extremely effective. But plenty of experts now disagree. Florida's Surgeon General just last week echoing RFK when he called for halting fluoride in that state's water.
It is public health malpractice with the information that we have now to continue adding fluoride to water systems in Florida.
Dr. Ashley Mallon is an assistant professor at the University of Florida's Department of Epidemiology. She led a recent study that suggests that fluoride exposure during pregnancy is linked to an increased risk of neurobehavioural problems in children.
So I think that the perception around health impacts of fluoride exposure has evolved considerably in the last 10 years. It's true, 10 years ago, to even really raise the question of whether fluoride was potentially neurotoxic would have you labeled a tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy theorist. But in the last decade or so, like I said, there have now been several studies published in high-impact, prestigious journals showing that relatively low fluoride exposure levels during pregnancy are associated with worse child neurodevelopmental outcomes. So that's my particular area of focus. And I think in terms of other health outcomes, there's so much that we still don't know about potential health effects of fluoride exposure in adults, for example, thyroid function, bone fracture. And there haven't been US-based studies conducted, in a rigorous sense, maybe prospectively, that address those health outcomes. So I think there is still a lot more for us to learn in those realms.
Look, this is a live issue, which, to be honest, probably needs even more research at this point in time, because it's not like there are no benefits to fluoride. It's not like they're made up. There have been places that, for instance, Calgary in Canada, where they removed the fluoride from the water in 2011. And over the next 8 years, I think we'll go here, children required urgent treatment for infection in Alberta Children's Hospital it skyrocketed by 700% over the next 8 years, and because the cavities lead to infections, right? So it's not like there's no risks involving removing fluoride from water, but over time, as we brush our teeth more efficiently and we've got better toothpaste, better dental products, there's other places you can get fluoride. Yeah. It's maybe becoming less effective in terms of the benefits, and then there are these detriments, which we don't know enough about at this point in time. We need to find out more about it, where the exact level is, because there's a level where it might be beneficial, and then it becomes not so beneficial, and we need to know exactly what that level is. So this is a live question. But I would just say that for those who are watching this and going, this is insanity, this is all conspiracy theories run amok, there are places that have never had fluoride in water.
Parts of Europe.
Well, yeah, but parts of Western Europe, for instance, and they don't have any problems at all. They do have some fluoride in other sources, though. Like, for instance, there's some parts in Europe where they have fluoride in the salt. There's some parts where they have fluoride in the milk. But there's some parts where they have fluoride at all. What they have is a functioning dental system. That helps.
Sure, yeah.
And that's
which America very much does not have.
Exactly. And that's something America might want to watch out for. But having said that, Portland, for instance, is the biggest city in America that's never had fluoride in the water. In Oregon, overall, I think it's only about 27% of Oregon has fluoride in the water compared to 72% for America. But for Portland, the dentists say they have cavity problems. The data suggests they don't. So the jury is out about the effectiveness in a first world country, which hopefully has a proper dental system.
And some of the arguments used in 1945 to start putting fluoride in the public water supply no longer apply in terms of the nutrition levels of the average American, as well as the availability of fluoridated toothpaste, mouthwash, etc., etc. So it is a fascinating issue. And Professor Howard Hu is Professor of Preventative Medicine at the University of Southern California. He's one of America's leading experts on environmental health. Professor, welcome to the Fireside Chat.
My pleasure.
So, Professor, based on your research and the research of others, how strong would you say the connection is between prenatal exposure to fluoride and neurobehavioural problems in those young children?
I think it's strong enough to be of major concern. The research now is clear from Canada, from the US and Mexico, and the research covers the levels of fluoride that can be seen in the general population, particularly those who are drinking fluoridated water.
And is this just a case of more studies needed, or do you believe a serious tweak in public fluoride management is already required right now?
Well, this is the kind of issue that requires thinking about the prevalence of the problem. And of course, here in the US, somewhere around 65% of the population drinks fluoridated water. So it affects huge swaths of the population. And the risk is often in the context of understanding impacts on IQ and behavior, which in a country like yours or ours, that's so much based on a knowledge economy, it's of major importance to society. And finally, the question is, what's the benefit? And because we're talking about prenatal exposures, what is interesting is the research that shows that prenatal fluoride actually doesn't benefit benefit teeth. The fluoride that does benefit teeth and lowers the risk of cavities is the fluoride exposure that happens once you're a child. You're out of infancy, you're 2 years old and older. So if there isn't that much benefit from prenatal fluoride exposure, and there's this mounting evidence of risks, seems to me that that already is suggests a pathway forward for policy.
And would you say that ending the fluoridization of public water is altogether the best way to approach this, or are there other ways of minimising fluoride exposure, including possibly filtering water for pregnant women, making that part of the advice?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, I don't have a great answer for that. Part of the concern, of course, for the public health authorities that are trying to balance all of the risks and benefits, is the concern that if you stop fluoride, the fluoridation of water, then even those who are, 2 years old and older will not have the benefits, and particularly those who are not prone to using fluoridated products like toothpaste, maybe more impoverished communities that don't have access to toothpaste every day. Will that start increasing their risk for cavities? I don't have a great answer for that, but I think that part of the equation is also understanding what is the actual relative importance these days of water fluoridation to cavities. And at the same time, we've been coming out with this research over the last year or two about fluoride exposure and intelligence. There has been an effort to take a look at all the recent studies on water fluoridation and cavities. And a study just came out in October. It's called the Cochrane Collaboration Study, where a group of investigators pulled together all the studies that were published after 1975, and did an analysis and a quantitative pooled data analysis showing that the benefit of water fluoridation is much smaller than it was in the pre-1975 era. In the pre-1975 era, there was evidence that water fluoridation on average was reducing cavities by about maybe 3 cavities per child, whereas in this summary analysis in studies published after 1975, the benefit was only about 1/4 of a cavity. So it raises this whole issue. Well, just how important is water fluoridation now that people have a exposure to fluoride from other products that are commonly available?
Now, Professor, when we're undertaking a balancing test for these kinds of issues, is the greatest concern of not enough fluoride simply more cavities, or are there greater concerns?
Yeah, well, I'm not aware of a benefit to fluoride that goes beyond the reduction of cavities. I will say that there is some concern that there are other adverse impacts of fluoride besides just neurobehavioral development. And because we're at an era where we can now use really rigorous tools for measuring fluoride and the potential adverse outcomes, we're in an era where we're going to be seeing a lot more research, I think, about fluoride's unintended consequences. So that, I mean, that's the research that has to be done. But in answer to your question about are there other benefits, I'm not aware of any.
And would you say that Robert Kennedy latching on to the very scientifically based concerns over exposure to fluoride Is that confused by the fact that he also latches onto very unscientific concerns over vaccine and denies the connection between HIV and AIDS? Is that a problem?
Yeah, no, the irony of having Robert F. Kennedy as the nominee for Secretary of Health and Human Services in the U.S. is that he may be on the right side of this issue on fluoride, but the history of his pronouncements and his opinions is not great when you consider his basing his opinions on good science. It's just ironic that in this case, I think he has a point. But I can certainly understand how it's confusing to the public because he's been the subject of a lot of skepticism by the mainstream science world based on his opinions on other issues in the past.
Professor Howard Hu, thank you very much indeed for having a fireside chat with us.
My pleasure.
And that is it for the Fireside Chat, not just for tonight, but for the whole year. But Planet America and the chat return in January next year. Until then, have a safe and very happy holiday season and a happy Thanksgiving to our American viewers.
And there's a brand new pet podcast coming your way before we knock off entirely, featuring a very special guest. But to take us out, a reminder of some of the highs and lows of this remarkable year in American politics. Merry Christmas.
With the midterms only 8 days behind us, it appears the 2024 presidential race has already begun.
I am tonight announcing my candidacy for President of the United States.
President Biden unveiling his re-election campaign with a new video.
Robert F. Kennedy announced today he is running for president as an independent.
Presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. confirms that doctors found a dead worm in his brain. The worm, quote, ate a portion of his brain, causing cognitive issues.
I need my speech.
As many people are saying, is Joe Biden too old?
What's your message to them?
Watch me.
President Biden stumbled and fell today at the U.S. Air Force Academy.
For what I've been able to do with the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
This was 90 minutes of
unmitigated disaster.
There's a full-on panic.
It's not just panic, it's pain. We're still far from our convention, and there is time for this party to figure out a different way forward if you will allow us to do that.
Take a look at what happened.
And they tried to kill the next president of the United States. Enough was enough.
NBC News has learned President Biden will step aside.
He's offering his full support and endorsement for Kamala Harris to be the nominee of the party.
I took on perpetrators of all kinds.
Laughing Kamala.
Predators who abused women.
Crazy Kamala.
Fraudsters who ripped off consumers.
Lying Kamala Harris.
Cheaters who broke the rules for their own gain.
She actually called me weird.
So hear me when I say, I know Donald Trump's type.
Nobody's spoken to crowds bigger than me. If you look at Martin Luther King, when he did his speech, we actually had more people.
This weird obsession with crowd sizes.
When it comes to the economy, do you believe Americans are better off than they were 4 years ago?
So I was raised as a middle-class kid.
They're eating the dogs.
Do you think Donald Trump is a fascist?
Yes, I do.
She's a Marxist, communist, fascist, socialist.
There's literally a floating island of garbage in the middle of the ocean right now. Yeah. I think it's called Puerto Rico.
The only garbage I see floating out there is his supporters.
It is election day in America.
It is election night in America.
That Donald Trump will become the 47th president of the United States.
And that we will engage in a peaceful transfer of power.
Hey, look what happened. Is this crazy?
Mr. President, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate
it's great to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you.